of ending. And of course, it's causing a stir of controversy because many people here at the Pentagon are saying, well, what about this war? When will it end? Well, I have a report here that says one senior general at the Pentagon, listening to both sides of this argument in terms of how long this war will go on, he says he thinks that in the short term, the pessimists will look right, but will be proved wrong by mid-April. And of course, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld has said we are closer to the beginning of this war than we are to the end. And President Bush today, speaking at MacDill Air Force Base at CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa, Florida, also addressed the troops and talked about the progress of the war. This is what he had to say.
Taking is not easy, and it may be long. Yet we know our destination. We will stay on the path, mile by mile, all the way to Baghdad and all the way to victory.
And in other big news of the day, there is now a limited open in the northern front of Iraq. Paratroopers of the Army's 173rd Brigade, based in Vicenza, Italy, parachuted into northern Iraq. 1,000 paratroopers are now on the ground. They secured an airfield. They call it a jump and carry operation. They will be bringing in heavy vehicles soon. This is the first regular Army unit in the north, adding to the Special Forces teams that have been there working with Kurdish rebels. To the south, there are reports that Iraqi Republican Guard troops are on the move, preparing to battle advancing coalition forces. So far, most of the attacks on American and British units have come from guerrilla-type attacks of unconventional Iraqis like the Fedayeen Saddam.
I don't know what the best description of that force is. Almost like a state secret police. In a way, they're enforcers. They do not follow the laws of armed conflict. In fact, they violate most of them. As you may recall, there were some found inside a hospital. That was their headquarters. They don't wear uniforms. They've used surrender flags to try to trick people into thinking they're surrendering, then ambush them.
Coalition forces are now going building to building in the south to take out Iraqi fighters who have been sporadically attacking. At one point, children actually led troops to a primary school filled with weapons and grenades. And as we look live now at Baghdad, there are reports of more explosions taking place in the capital city. At least 30 explosions were heard. Some of those bombs zeroed in on the Iraqi television center for the second time. And Pentagon officials have also said today that some Iraqi forces are now dressing in U.S. uniforms to commit acts against their own people and to attack U.S. forces. And now evidence from the battlefield. Our own Fox News' Greg Kelly, who was embedded there, reported that U.S. troops found American uniforms in a bunker abandoned by the Iraqi Fedayeen. I'm Kelly right here at the Pentagon. Shep?
Kelly, thanks very much. Let's go back to Baghdad in that live picture now and hook up with correspondent David Chater, who's inside Baghdad and joining us on the phone. David, getting reports of some bomb blasts in the last, I don't know, 8-9 minutes. What do you know?
Yes, just before I came through to you, Shep, I heard yet again another dawn chorus of bombs coming from the north of the city, on the outskirts of the city. Quite a few of them, quite a few clusters of explosions. Impossible for me to see exactly where they were, but they were coming from the northern outskirts of the city. It follows about a series of 30 strikes during the night and some anti-aircraft fire around about 4 a.m. this morning, my time, Baghdad time. But a very different scene here this morning. A clear blue sky above the city, a very good distant view now of the outskirts of the city from where I am. It's a huge contrast to yesterday when we were shrouded in a sandstorm, and you just couldn't see where the strikes were coming from, where they were landing. This time I've got a very clear view, and a lot of people are back out on the streets again, going to the markets, getting some fresh food while they can. I think it's beginning to dawn on most people here that this is going to be a long war.
David, I wonder, you talk about going to the market and getting what they can. Is it business as usual? Are most shops and the rest open? Is life carrying on in the middle of this?
Life is carrying on very much in the middle of this. You see souks opening up in street corners. You see vegetable sellers, spring onions, tomatoes, potatoes. People take the opportunity as soon as day breaks to get out from their houses. They've been sheltering with their families all night, hearing the explosions all around them. And this is an opportunity to meet up with their friends again, give the children some fresh air Well, of course, it's dangerous. There's been no stop to the strikes on the city, but the people have to get out. They have to see each other, have to reassure each other, make contact with their friends, see what's happened to them. That's what the people here are doing. They're going about their business as much as they can, but that business is now survival.
David, clearly none of the targets involved here by coalition forces have been anything civilian. I guess there's the possibility now that one missile or bomb of some kind may have struck a civilian target, or as the Pentagon puts it, it may be that in fact that was one of Saddam Hussein's tricks. But I guess my question is, do they get the message now that in fact this is not a campaign targeting civilians, but a campaign targeting that regime?
They don't get any message apart from the fact that they see these missiles striking in civilian areas. And on Iraqi television, they get the Iraqi government's point of view. As far as they're concerned, if this is a war of liberation and a war meant for them, then why are there so many civilian casualties? That's the feeling I'm transmitting to you from the streets here in Baghdad. It's very hard to get a clear perspective on the war when you're in a city being bombed day and night, every single hour or so. It's very hard for them to actually grasp what's happening. They don't have a full flow of information like you do. I don't have that full flow of information either. All we can see and hear are attacks on the city.
Have they gotten any of these 13 million leaflets that have been dropped that are supposed to explain to them and the soldiers what's going on here and how all of this is to play out?
That's a no to that one. I have not seen any leaflets falling in or around Baghdad. There are still a lot of air defenses here, and I don't know what sort of planes they're using to drop those leaflets, but I think that would be a pretty vulnerable target if they tried to fly over Baghdad at the moment. The air defenses are still very much alive and well. I've been hearing ack-ack, as I say, at 4 a.m. this morning, anti-aircraft fire. So no, those leaflets haven't been dropped here. I mean, there's very limited information getting through to anybody here. So no, they don't know why this is happening. They don't know why civilians are dying here and children are dying here. So there's very limited information for them to make up their minds. The perspective is that they're closing in on each other, they're giving support to each other, they're trying to do what they can. There is a remarkable spirit on the streets. It's sometimes very angry after scenes of carnage that we witnessed here yesterday.
David, surely there is
Surely
there is an understanding that there's an enormous difference between this and the previous war. Surely they can look and see that the vast majority, or all of the targets, are certainly targets of the military or targets of the regime there, and that civilians are never targeted during this war. An occasional errant missile and, regret all around for the fact that civilians have died. But surely they can see that somebody is trying to topple that regime.
I've seen, not the occasional, but so far 6 cases where there have been explosions in streets, nowhere near an apparent military target. Unlike you, they don't have briefings from the Pentagon, the White House, or Doha. So they don't know. They don't actually know. All they know is that these bombs and these missiles are striking in areas where there appears to them to be no military target and where there are a lot of civilian casualties. That's all they know. They have to make up their minds from what they see. And they don't understand what's going on. They don't understand why they're under this siege. And there have been no leaflets dropped over Baghdad to explain the situation to them.
I wonder if they think Saddam Hussein is still alive.
Well, as far as they're concerned, they've seen the president on Iraqi television. They've seen him several times now. They've seen him issuing orders to the Fedayeen, the irregular troops, to attack the long supply lines. They've seen broadcast images of their militia, Ba'ath Party militia, plus their regular troops fighting on the front line. These are the reports they're getting. That TV station is still up, it's still operating, and that's the information they're getting.
I know that the TV station went down for a while. It sounded as if it was a target of the coalition forces for a while, that it was up and then down. What do you know about the status of that thing?
Well, it was actually, it was about 600 yards away from where I do my live reports from the roof of the Ministry of Information. It's an uncomfortable feeling standing there, knowing that you're so close to so many targets, which the coalition forces are calling military targets. But yes, that television station was within a few hours. It was back on air and broadcasting the the pictures of fighting and resistance, and messages from the Minister of Information, from cabinet ministers, and indeed letters being read out from President Saddam Hussein giving strict instructions to his troops to launch attacks across the whole long line of supply and communication which the coalition forces have opened up between Kuwait and Baghdad. So as far as they're concerned, nothing has changed.
It's a powerful propaganda tool, isn't it?
Well, there's propaganda tools on both sides. I mean, the Western media is one of the most sophisticated media. Propaganda war is being fought by both sides.
Clearly, except the Western media, you could make the argument, is at least giving factual information and not trying to make people think that they are targets, and not trying to get innocents in harm's way, and not trying to get supply lines attacked and all the rest. It seems to me that one side could be argued as somewhat more noble than the other, that the other is manipulating a people into trying to keep this tyrannical regime alive.
Well, from inside Baghdad, I'm not getting the information you're getting. I'm not seeing what you're seeing, and nor are the people of Baghdad. So it's very hard to argue that point with you. All I can do is tell you what I'm seeing, tell you what they are seeing, and tell you the reactions of the people that I meet on the streets here every day.
Indeed. David Chater, we certainly appreciate the perspective from inside Saddam's Iraq. And for our viewers who may be watching this and listening, you have to keep in mind that reporters who are inside Saddam Hussein's Iraq, especially in and around the capital, are no doubt monitored, and they are very careful to give us precise observations of what it is that they see and what it is that the Iraqi people are seeing at a time when clearly smoke rises over the Iraqi capital. Now, President Bush rallies the troops, and British Prime Minister Tony Blair trying to rally support in a war summit at Camp David. Our White House correspondent Wendell Goler with the latest.
The President and Prime Minister are holding their first face-to-face talk since they decided at their summit in the Azores a week and a half ago that UN diplomacy had failed and exile was the only way for Saddam Hussein to avoid a war. Now, a week into the fighting, diplomacy is struggling again, this time over the issue of how much authority the UN should have in rebuilding post-war Iraq. Prime Minister Blair says he's here to get the U.S. and Europe working again as partners and not as rivals. Ironically, the two men are looking beyond the war on the very day the president told U.S. airmen and women at Central Command outside Tampa, Florida, that the war is far from over. Though he said day by day Hussein is losing his grip on Iraq, and he had no doubt in the ultimate outcome of the war. Central Command is where the Iraq war plan was born, and Mr. Bush got a briefing from the generals who drew it up. His aides said the coalition forces are actually ahead of schedule, but the president himself wouldn't go that far.
Our military is making good progress in Iraq, yet this war is far from over. As they approach Baghdad, our fighting units are facing the most desperate elements of a doomed regime. We cannot know the duration of this war, but we are prepared for the battle ahead.
Prime Minister Blair arrived this evening in a driving rainstorm. In fact, his plane was struck by lightning about 20 minutes before it landed. The latest UN problem involves the same countries who rejected the U.S.-British pre-war resolution on the UN Security Council. They're now blocking a deal giving the UN a role in rebuilding Iraq after the war. France says it would legitimize the military action. Secretary of State Powell told some skeptical members of Congress today the U.S. and France are usually on the same page.
On issue after issue, there is fundamental agreement. And as I once remarked somewhat jovially, you know, the United States and France, we've been in marriage counseling for 225 years. But guess what? The marriage is there. And it will be there.
Tonight, Tony Blair's the marriage counselor trying to get the U.S. to give the UN more power than it really wants, and trying to get some members of the UN Security Council to swallow their pride about a war they couldn't prevent, in which the U.S. blames, at least in part, on the UN's failure to enforce its own resolutions. The President and Prime Minister will hold a series of meetings around an 11 a.m. news conference that Fox News Channel will carry live. At the White House, Wendell Goler, Fox News.
Wendell, thanks very much. And a photograph here. Showed you this once in the last hour. This from Camp David as the British Prime Minister and the American President sit and talk before tomorrow's meeting between the British Prime Minister and Kofi Annan of the Secretary General of the United Nations. Of course, Fox News Channel will have complete, fair, and balanced coverage of those meetings tomorrow, and this the results of this war summit, though they likely call it something else. The reality certainly is it's a bit of a war summit as they discuss the progress of the war in Iraq. And still to come on Fox News Channel's 24/7 coverage of that war. The North is now open for business. Army Rangers parachuting into Iraq, 1,000 of them now on the ground and on the move. We're live on the Northern Front. Straight ahead.
Baby, I love you so much for staying behind me every step of the way.
Hi to my wife and kids. I love and miss you, and I'll see you soon.
It's very hard right now.
To my family, I love you guys. I'll be home soon.
My mom, my dad, I love you guys. I love you, and I'm okay.
I love you.
I love you too.
This is crabgrass. I don't want to see crabgrass in my lawn.
My wife actually hates crabgrass.
Nobody would want this in their lawn. We put down Scott's turf builder with Halts in the early spring.
That's the only thing I ever use. Scott's puts this protective barrier over the lawn.
And it stops the crabgrass from germinating.
See how nice and thick that is?
Feels like the carpet inside my house. Well, I've used the cheap brands, and it's like anything else. You get what you pay for. Steve doesn't have any crabgrass, which makes him a good human being, basically. Turf builder with Halts.
The best defense against crabgrass.
Tomorrow, from the military war chest to the price of humanitarian aid, what is the bottom line for taxpayers and the economy? Answers from Senator Don Nichols on Your World with Neil Cavuto.
Minutes now to the top of the hour and the latest updates in the war in Iraq. But first, turning now to the battle for the hearts and minds. Some civilians apparently already rising up against Saddam Hussein's troops in the south. But my next guest says most Iraqis are still skeptical, and the war will not be won until allies force Saddam out and win the people's trust. Iraqi-American author Joseph Brody has written a book called The New Iraq, Rebuilding the Country for Its People, the Middle East, and the World. He joins me live now from Washington. Good to see you, sir. Thank you.
Hey, Shepard.
Mr. Brody, how do you win over these hearts and minds when you can't even get them to listen? There's no way to even talk to them. Listening to David Chater just a minute ago, who, mind you, is always being monitored by the Iraqis, I seem to get the sense that they have no idea what's going on here.
Well, David's doing a great job out in Baghdad, but I want to add to what he said that there are open lines of communication. Since 1998, every day, the U.S. has been broadcasting into Iraq in something called Ida'at al-Iraq al-Hur, which means Radio Free Iraq, and a whole lot of Iraqis are tuning in. I know that because I myself have interviewed in Arabic on that program and actually got an email from inside the country.
You talk about the long-term process of winning over the hearts and minds. There are people in the South, probably right about now, who are still wondering, are these coalition forces are really going to be here for us because they've proved us wrong in the past?
That's absolutely right. As you probably know, back in '91, many of the Iraqis actually rose to the challenge of moving to depose the central government in 15 of the 18 provinces on perceived American support. And they felt let down when the U.S. didn't come through. So this time they're going to wait and see, because they're not sure, and this may seem strange to us, but they're not sure that America is going to follow through this time around. Seems to me one of the first thing, in fact, the first thing you have to do is get in there and get them the food and water that they need that they haven't been able to get. After that, how do you maintain the process of changing their minds about the West? Well, you know, it's all about facts on the ground. We need to separate the regional issues, because we have, as you know, Al Jazeera and many other networks out there that are going to be heckling us at every step of the way, from the local issues inside Iraq, which are so much more about America coming together to deliver value to Iraq by fostering a provisional government and social and economic justice for the country. And that's really what it's going to be about in the long run.
Reading some of your book, it sounds as if there are a number of people who have gotten the message inside the country, but that the very vast majority really has not. And I wonder if that's part of the problem with the lack of surrender on the part of some of these troops who a lot of people thought might surrender in the early going, that they're just really not sure if we'll carry through with this?
I think that the vast majority of Iraqis do welcome an initiative to put down Saddam at last. There is disagreement on the future of the country and the role of outsiders. But at this moment, Shepard, I think that most Iraqis are keeping their heads down and waiting to see the U.S. go into Baghdad and take care of Saddam at last before they emerge to celebrate. I would also add, if I may, that this is a country where public celebrations are generally organized. Every time you see a protester... That's right.
How about always?
I would say almost always, with the notable exception of that 1991 uprising. So they may need a little bit of help from advanced teams to come into the cities and say, listen, we're doing this, we're going through with it, let's plan a celebration.
Hasn't some of that advanced talking, though, already begun? Aside from the radio, which you mentioned, isn't there supposed to be an underlying chatter that's been sort of slid into the fabric of society there over the past 6-8 months?
Yes, I suspect that a lot more is going on than we see through the camera, and I'm optimistic that that will soon yield results. But I do maintain that the most important thing is to cut to the chase and put down the central government in Baghdad, because that is the only result that will prove to Iraqis that this time we mean business.
Well, it sounds as if, in fact, I'm pretty sure that's what we tried to do on the very first night. That very first strike was an attempt to take out not only Saddam Hussein, but the top of the leadership there. We don't even know for sure whether that was successful or not, and clearly the Iraqi people believe that it was not. Why can't we take down this television channel? And if we did, how much help would that be to our cause?
Well, we've been trying to take it down, and we put it down, and they put themselves back up. Obviously, it's always possible for a television channel like Iraqi National to set up an alternative broadcasting site, and that's probably part of what's going on. And yes, in the long run, we need to put it down because it is a source of confusion. They are broadcasting deceitful stories and really confusing the people. It's not something that's helpful for us in the long run.
David Chater talked about the propaganda war on both sides, and there's no question that propaganda is a part of every war and both sides in every war. But it seems to equate the kind of propaganda that comes from this side to the kind of propaganda that comes from that side to not be very fair and balanced.
Well, yes, I would draw a distinction between our own coverage here in the U.S. and many Western networks and what we're seeing on Iraqi national television. I've actually met with the director of Iraqi cultural programming. It's interesting to note that a lot of the political leaders we see on TV, Naji Sabri, the foreign minister, Tariq Aziz, they all cut their teeth as journalists in Iraq. And there's a revolving door between the mouths of the political leadership and the messages that we get on Iraqi television.
Joseph Brody is the guest. The book is The New Iraq, Rebuilding the Country for Its People, the Middle East, and the World. Good to see you. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, sir.
Our live coverage rolls on in just a moment. Some of the headlines from the war zone tonight. The Northern Front is now in place. 1,000 paratroopers coming from the sky. And now the question is, what can be done from the south? Headlines in the Washington Post on their online version today: this war could take months. Who are these sources? What do they mean? And whoever in the first place said this thing would be quick, tidy, and easy? Right now, the Marines and others have moved their way to within 50 to 100 miles of the front lines. Our embedded reporters are on the ground waiting to bring you dispatches as available. I'm Shepard Smith in New York. For all of us in the Fox News family, thanks for trusting us for your news and information. Lori Dew and Bob Sellers continue our live coverage next. Until then, stay brave, stay aware, and stay with Fox.
Mom, Dad, welcome to our new home. Oh, Bill's afraid of termites, so we had the entire home made of concrete.
Oh. So modern.
Comfortable. Here's a better idea. Call Terminix for a lifetime protection plan that covers repairs on any new termite damage. Don't you want protection this good? 1-800-TERMINIX. No bugs, no hassles.
For a mattress. Good for the back.
Epson T001. Canon BC31E.
Shopping for ink and toner in most stores is hit or miss.
HP C9720.
Come on.
A.
At Staples, we stock a huge selection of cartridges, so we guarantee we'll have the one you need. Online or in store, promise.
HP 45.
Bingo.
Your ink and toner in stock. Staples. That was easy.
Tomorrow,
The regime must go, and Iraq must be disarmed.
for more than a week, Allied forces have pushed forward, sweeping down on Iraq's military strongholds. Now, as the fighting intensifies and bombs continue to rain on Baghdad, are Saddam's days numbered? Tomorrow, for the latest coverage on Iraq, stay with Fox News Channel's primetime lineup.
It is 1 o'clock on the East Coast. It is 9 a.m. in Baghdad. Hello, everybody. I'm Bob Sellers.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lori Dew. You are watching continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom here on FNC.
Vicious sandstorms appear to be slowly letting up as U.S. troops head north toward Baghdad. Warned of rumors about a convoy of Iraqi Republican Guard troops reportedly heading south. The thick dust and sand has made driving nearly impossible for days.
The first major relief convoy finally rolled into Iraq today, bringing much-needed water, food, and supplies to the Iraqi people. Hundreds of locals cheering as the troops came in. They swarmed around the Allied troops who were handing out 21,000 meals.
British Prime Minister Tony Blair at Camp David meeting with President Bush, saying that the United States and its allies must broaden their agenda beyond Iraq and help build peace in the Middle East and across the globe.
Now let's go for a live report from Fox correspondent Kelly Wright, who is standing by live at the Pentagon tonight. Kelly, a lot of developments in the last few hours. Please bring us up to date.
Okay, Lori, good morning to you and Bob and to everyone. The Pentagon is saying a lot of things about the progress of this war. Earlier today, Pentagon spokesperson Tori Clark told us that the Pentagon is actually, the war is on the 6th day of this campaign, and we have air dominance. We have special forces in the north, south, and west. We have the main forces moving at a phenomenal pace towards Baghdad. And let's look at Baghdad live right now. We can show you that there's smoke in the air where bombs have been falling once again on the capital city. The Pentagon reports some 1,500 sorties have been flown in the last 24 hours. Targets included another hit on the Iraqi television center. There are reports that it is still operating, but at a diminished signal. There is now a limited open in northern Iraq. Paratroopers of the Army's 173rd Brigade, based in Vicenza, Italy, parachuted into northern Iraq today. 1,000 paratroopers are now on the ground. They secured an airfield. They call it a jump and carry operation. They will be bringing in heavy vehicles soon. And this is the first regular Army unit in the north, adding to the special forces teams that have been there working with Kurdish rebels. To the south, more progress. There are reports that Iraqi Republican Guard troops are on the move, but the U.S. and British forces are ready for them. Those Iraqi forces are, we're told, are preparing to battle the advancing coalition forces. So far, most of the attacks on American and British units have come from guerrilla-type attacks of unconventional Iraqis like the Fedayeen Saddam.
I don't know what the best description of that force is. Almost like a state secret police. In a way, they're their enforcers. They do not follow the laws of armed conflict. In fact, they violate most of them. As you may recall, there were some found inside a hospital. That was their headquarters. They don't wear uniforms. They've used surrender flags to try to trick people into thinking they're surrendering, then ambush them.
Coalition forces are now going building to building in the south to take out Iraqi fighters there who have been sporadically attacking. At one point, children led British soldiers to a primary school filled with weapons and grenades. Again in Baghdad, there are more reports of more explosions taking place in the capital city. At least 30 explosions were heard so far. And Pentagon officials have said today some Iraqi forces are now dressing as with our uniforms to commit acts against their own people and to attack U.S. forces, and now there is evidence from the battlefield. Okay, our own Greg Kelly is embedded there. He has been telling us that they went into an abandoned Iraqi bunker, and there they found the uniforms, the American uniforms that the Iraqi soldiers had been wearing at one point, giving proof and evidence that that, in fact, has been going on in the theater of war. Again, moving at a phenomenal pace, and now that the sandstorms are beginning to clear, we will likely see more of an advance. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld has said that more troops are being added to the theater of war. I'm Kelly Wright at the Pentagon. Back now to Lori.
Kelly, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about something that broke earlier tonight on the front page of WashingtonPost.com. I know you know what I'm talking about, this report by Thomas Ricks, who said that senior officials told him, we don't know who these officials are, and we don't know how many there are, but told him that the war could last months. What's the response there tonight to that?
You know, the response among some of the defense officials is that this is like dirty laundry being aired. It's also like bad office politics, if you will. But if I can categorize it this way, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld has always maintained that we are closer to the beginning of this war than we are to the end. President Bush himself rallied the troops today by saying that the war may take a while, but that victory is assured. And when you read this kind of report, it's very pessimistic. However, the optimism here, as Tory Clark said earlier today, that in 6 days we have made a tremendous move, and that move will continue at a phenomenal pace. So again, it really is like some bad office politics going on here. Some people are very upset with the game plan of the war. They're thinking that it's not going the correct way, but senior defense officials say one thing is very clear about this, is that the campaign remains on track.
Right, and that we know what the outcome is going to be. Kelly Wright.
And the outcome is victory.
That's right. They'll accept nothing less, and I don't think they'll get anything less than victory. Kelly Wright at the Pentagon, thanks very much.
Can we take a shot at Baghdad there? Just wanted to show some folks, if they're joining us, some of the smoke on the horizon there from the left side of the screen. That's relatively new. Over the past 20 minutes or so, we've seen that. We have reports of explosions in Baghdad. Kelly mentioned that. That's evidence thereof right there. And this is a day very different from what we saw over the past couple of days with those wicked sandstorms that Rick Leventhal, for instance, had to deal with in the 1st Marine Division, 3rd ALAR, and he joins us right now with an update. Rick.
Hey, Bob, we're rolling north on the highway, so I apologize for any noise you might hear. It's the light armored vehicle we're in. Makes quite a hum, plus the turret is turning, so you may hear the hydraulics of on the turret as they scan the horizon for potential threats. The landscape has changed pretty dramatically for us now. We went from desert to more like farmland. We were seeing a lot of green fields, a lot of palm trees, and farms, small farmhouses made out of clay or mud. And we were seeing cows and sheep and goats, donkeys, and a lot of people. They seem friendly. Some of them are just sitting, sort of watching this parade of tanks and APCs and LAVs roll by, and others are waving at us and smiling and gesturing as we cruise past. So the fighting that we have been hearing about or seeing firsthand over the past 3 or 4 days doesn't seem to have spread this far to the north. We were anticipating resistance, but so far we haven't met it. Again, traveling through what now appears to be farmland as we continue to push further north.
Hey, Rick, it seems like you all were going at quite a pace, and we have heard you progressively get more and more tired, frankly. And until last night, you were quite tired. Tonight, you sound more well-rested. And my question for you is the slowing of the pace that has been reported with some of these units, including yours, has that allowed some of the troops to get more rest?
It has, and we were able to get a decent night's sleep last night. Thanks for recognizing that. Got several hours, which was hours more than we normally get. And yeah, when the storm stops traffic, it also allows people to sleep, and that's clearly important for these Marines. It's a beautiful day today. The sun is shining. It's cool but clear. Visibility is excellent. It's a great day to make up some time and make up some miles, and that's what we're doing.
Hey, Rick, it's Lori Dew. I've got a quick question for you while we've got you on the line there. I know that in the last few days when we were talking to you, you were hearing a constant stream of artillery fire. Almost every time we talked to you, you could hear it in the background. Is it quiet there right now, or is a firefight underway?
It is, and if you lose me, it's because my battery's about to give out. But yes, we've seen artillery set up. In fact, we went to sleep last night with it about 50 feet away from us, and we just passed another battery of howitzer cannons lined across the highway from us. So they're out here, and some of them continue to push north. We're sort of leapfrogging each other. They're here, and they're continuing to position and look for targets.
Hey,
But
Rick,
right now,
I wanted to
they're
ask
not
you about some of the mud that you all had and some of the vehicles that got caught in it. Is that a problem that affected these so that they're no longer usable, or did you pull them out of the mud? And the second question, go ahead.
Well, we did have a couple get stuck, and it was quite an ordeal to get them out. But these vehicles, they have equipment to do that. You know, they're used to traveling in pretty rough terrain and muddy terrain, and sometimes they get stuck. And they were able to pull them out, and they're rolling again. So it was a process. It had to be completed, and it was in relatively short order.
Were those tracked vehicles, or were those wheeled vehicles?
These are wheels. There are tracks with us. The armored personnel carriers, or APCs, that carry infantry Marines. Those have tracks. There are M1 tanks out here with tracks. But we've got 8 tires on these things. They get very muddy, but they also are 8-wheel drive. So once they get going, they can pull through just about anything.
Hey, Rick, there have been a lot of developments just in the last several hours, most notably that this northern front is taking place in Iraq. About 1,000 Army Rangers have landed there in northern Iraq. Are you getting information about those activities or any others out there?
No, we're pretty limited in our scope. You know, we hear about what's happening around us and what will be happening in the future, but that's something that, you know, I obviously can't talk about. But our scope is pretty much limited to the efforts of the 3rd LAR and the other Marine Division that we're providing protection for. These guys have been meeting with some delays, some pretty fierce resistance as they push north, and also the weather held them up. But again, today looks like a great day to make up time and reach some objectives.
Last question for you, Rick. How's the morale there? How are the guys doing today?
You know, there was some shaking of the heads this morning with all that mud and muck that we were stuck in. But these guys are they're feeling pretty good. They did get some rest, and they're looking forward to a productive day.
All right, Rick Leventhal, 1st Marine, 3rd LAR. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you next time we can. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
All right. All right, well, let's go now, not too terribly far away, to Kuwait City, and that is where Fox's Jonathan Hunt is standing by. And Jonathan, I guess the big news from there is this large humanitarian effort that's finally underway. Bring us up to date on that and the rest of the news from there.
Yeah, good morning, Laurie. First to some military developments, the very important news that the Northern Front has now effectively been opened. Remember, there were some problems with that because the Turkish parliament voted not to allow US troops to base there to move into northern Iraq, but now they found a way around that. Around 1,000 troops from the 173rd Airborne dropping in, securing an airfield near the town of Bashur. Now, that is about 30 miles south of the border with Turkey. Now, they were given cover as they dropped in by warplanes flying off of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, who bombed command and control bunkers as well as Iraqi ground troop positions in the north. They were also helped by Kurdish fighters who are allies of the US. They sealed off roads around this airfield, which, by the way, has a 6,700-foot runway. That is very important because it allows the military to fly in those huge C-17s as well as other military cargo planes. Now, at the other end of the country, around Basra, still a fierce fight raging there. British troops have encircled the city. They're battling not just Iraqi regular soldiers, but also around 1,000 Iraqi militia. Overnight, a column of Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles tried to leave Basra. It's been pounded by planes, coalition aircraft flying from their bases here in Kuwait. Not sure what the motive for the Iraqi tanks moving out was, either simply to get away from the British troops or perhaps to move further south and attack other coalition forces. Either way, these air raids should prevent them achieving either of those objectives. Now, there is apparently an unfolding humanitarian crisis, according to aid agencies in Basra. That could be fixed pretty soon once the troops get in, because the aid is now ready to roll. British troops have secured the port city of Qasr. They found they've dealt with pockets of Iraqi resistance there, and they have uncovered large caches of weapons, but the city is now secure. That means all the aid that is waiting offshore can roll in. Some convoys have already begun to roll in overland from Kuwait. One to the border town of Safwan, greeted by hundreds of cheering Iraqis, clearly desperate for the food that convoy carried. Those white boxes had a total of around 21,000 meals in them: bread, flour, tea and water, and clearly the Iraqi people were delighted to receive it. And I think it's important to point out, Laurie, that just 1 week into this war, this huge humanitarian aid effort that President Bush promised is already underway. That's the latest live from Kuwait City. Laurie, back to you.
All right, that's really quite extraordinary when you think about it. Jonathan Hunt in Kuwait City. We'll check back in with you a bit later. Thanks very much.
I want to take you back to Iraq right now. We have some live pictures coming out of Al-Naziriyah where we see some operations going on, some preparations here. And this, of course, is where there has been some relatively significant resistance as the coalition forces go through there and establish the crossing in the Euphrates. And as you'll recall, it was the convoy going north in which that group got separated. And, well, it appears to those that have looked at any of the film that's been fed back that a number of them were executed, and, of course, prisoners of war taken as well. Again, we're looking at that's a reporter there in Al-Naziriyah. Military operations continue, and will continue to follow that, of course.
And indeed, we were hearing reports earlier that Marines were literally fighting house to house in Nasiriyah. A reporter who's embedded with the Camp Lejeune Marines, this is a reporter from North Carolina, said at least 25 Marines had been injured. Now, we get reports like this coming in all throughout the day, and obviously injuries are not unexpected when you've got war going on. But this reporter said that the Marines in Nasiriyah today were using flares to light areas so that they could see the enemy. Again, not unusual in a nighttime war situation, using flares so that they can see what's going on. This has been one of the major pockets of resistance, as Bob mentioned a moment ago, that our troops have encountered on the way to Baghdad. And of course, we'll keep you posted if we get some more pictures from Nasiriyah and let you know what's going on there.
Well, during Operation Desert Storm, Air Force Captain Keith Rosencrantz piloted his F-16 in 30 combat missions, from the bombing of Iraq's nuclear research facility to attacks on the notorious Highway of Death. He is the author of the book Vipers in the Storm, Diary of a Gulf War Fighter Pilot, and Mr. Rosencrantz joins us now from Dallas, Texas. Good afternoon. Good morning, sir. You see, it says 1:17, and somewhere that's afternoon. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us. We have reports, as you've probably heard. They're conflicting, but something to the order of there's a convoy of vehicles, troops coming out of Baghdad heading south. We don't know exactly where they're going. But as a fighter pilot, aren't they sitting ducks if we get our guys in the sky?
I think they are. When I flew and participated in missions during the Gulf War, the J-Stars aircraft were brand new, and those aircraft are designed to spot those convoys. They can find them, they can come up with coordinates and pass those on to the fighter pilots that are airborne. Those fighter pilots can then roll in with their aircraft and bomb those positions and take those forces out.
Give me a feel for the complications we've seen over the past couple days. Have included smoke, of course, part of that in Baghdad, the oil trenches set on fire, and the dust operations. As we look at a live shot of Baghdad, where there has been some activity in recent hours, including the smoke from the left, probably within the last half hour. Could you give me a feel for what affects the flying capabilities and the ability to target and deliver our arsenal, if you will?
I remember the first times that I flew at night and dropped down below some of that smoke layer and saw those oil fields on fire in Kuwait. I was flying with Maverick missiles at the time, and I needed clear air to do that. And once I dropped down below that smoke layer and spotted the targets, I was able to fire the missiles. In today's environment, where more of the bombs are precision guided, they don't necessarily have to have clear weather. If you have a joint direct attack munition package on a dumb bomb that is loaded with GPS coordinates, it knows where to go, whether there's smoke or clouds or not.
Now, that having been programmed ahead of time, correct?
That is correct.
Now, if there's a situation in which you're looking at a convoy of tanks, let's say, and you need visual contact to be able to lock on to them with the laser, correct?
That is correct. When you're providing close air support for ground forces, generally you're going to be holding out at what we call a cap point. And those aircraft are holding out there, and they're in touch with a forward air controller. Now, when that forward air controller has information on a particular convoy or a set of artillery or tanks that he wants taken out, he will pass that information on to the pilot. Now, if that pilot is a A-10 pilot, for example, and he's down at low altitude getting ready to make a pass, yes, he needs clear weather. He needs good visibility to be able to come in and use his gun or use the weapons that he has to employ them on that tank division.
And in fact, we're taking a look at the many weapons and gears and gadgets that F-16 pilots carry with them. That's really quite remarkable that you've got all that in the cockpit with you. Captain, we know that you flew F-16s. We know that so many different bombing aircraft and fighter aircraft are being used. We got B-1s, B-2s, F-14s, F-16s, F-18s. How much better, though, is the technology in these planes now than it was when you flew back in the Gulf War?
Well, I'll give you a couple examples. I flew 27 out of 30 missions at night, and I was qualified in a program called Lantern, which gave me basically a window into the night. And I had an infrared picture that I could see mainly through my head-up display. Today's pilots have infrared goggles which allow them to look outside and see everything and get that same picture. The other difference for us, I think the F-16 flew more missions and dropped more bombs than any other aircraft in the Gulf War, but the majority of our bombs were dumb bombs. Today, the F-16s have targeting pods which allow the pilots to come in at a high or medium altitude, stay away from the AAA, the small arms, and then drop accurate precision-guided weapons. Much different today than it was back when I flew 12 years ago.
It's really extraordinary. A lot of people are becoming very curious about the lives of fighter pilots and how they make it through these missions that can last 10 hours, 20 hours, 24 hours, and so on. Earlier tonight, we heard from some B-2 stealth pilots who just got finished flying through a 36-hour mission. Did you ever have anything like that?
When I took off to deploy to the Middle East, I was in my F-16 for 17 hours. We took off from the East Coast and flew nonstop, air refueled 10 times, and finally landed in the United Arab Emirates the following afternoon. And it was tough. I was in the cockpit by myself. I had a couple of boxed lunches. I took the Go pills that you've heard about. They're 5 milligrams of dexedrine. I took one every 2 hours and took a total of 7.
What did that do to you, though? I mean, did you feel like you were on speed? Not that you necessarily know what that feels like, but did you feel, gosh, you know, I really need to take these pills to stay awake?
I felt more alert. I felt comfortable in the cockpit. The last couple of hours, once the sun came up and you're looking directly into the sun, I can recall flying over Egypt, the Red Sea, through Saudi Arabia and across the Gulf. And I got to the point where I was hitting a wall. I needed to land.
We want to bring in somebody with us here, Captain Lieutenant Colonel Brian Haig, U.S. Army retired. Thank you for being here, and we want to talk to both of you here. We've got an impending battle of Baghdad coming up. We've got infantry on the ground. Obviously, we have Air Force support. You helped set up U.S. CENTCOM, correct?
Yes.
What are those military officers right now at the highest levels talking about? What kind of strategies are they dealing with now, especially considering what we've seen?
Yeah, what you have is you have a full-out operations center, and inside the operations center you have essentially 2 planning cells. One of those cells is what you call the current battle cell, and what they're doing is they're looking at what is going to happen on the ground within the next 24 hours. Then you have what is called the deep battle cell. And every morning, for example, Tommy Franks, when he walks in, these two different cells brief him, and they interlock. The second cell is looking at what's the future battle and how we want to shape it. You keep hearing this term, shaping the battlefield. What they're referring to is where the deep battle cell is looking 72 hours out, even as far as 100 hours out, and saying, okay, by hour number 36, what we'd like to do is engage this unit here, so we need to shape the artillery here, we need to do this, we need to do that. So this is what you're looking at right now, and what I think has probably been occurring in the last 48 hours here is what they keep calling shaping of the battlefield.
Right.
Specifically, I want to ask you about some new developments in the north. It looks like we've got a northern front opening up. You've got 1,000 Army paratroopers who came in on what was something called a jump and carry operation. Yeah. I didn't know that until tonight, that's what that was called. How hard is this to do? How hard is it for these guys who make what I presume to be not the easiest landing in the world?
It's a very tough thing. It's a combat jump, and so they jump from about 800 feet above the ground. And at that altitude, you really have to hope that your main chute deploys. Yeah. You don't have much of a chance to pull your reserve. And of course, there's the adrenaline rush. And when you walk out that airplane, you never know what's on the ground. So you've got that double danger of, one, making a jump, and then secondly, we have bad guys on the ground. Essentially what they're going to be doing once they hit the ground is going out and securing that airfield, which means they move to the high ground around it, and they set up defensive positions, and they lock in artillery, and they do these kinds of things, so that now C-17s can start bringing in M1 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles.
How important is it for our troops to be in this area along with Kurdish troops who are in there? They're obviously going to be working together in some way, I presume.
Yeah, Lori, it's a very good question. I think what's happening here is, if you look at the Iraqi positions now, they're in a sort of a perimeter. They're encircled. And what that gives you in a military tactician's perspective is what is called interior lines, which means that they can move units around very quickly on the inside where you're having to move on the outside. By bringing the paratroopers in, by seizing the airfield, by beginning to open up this front, and really putting a threat there. There are 2 Iraqi divisions north of Baghdad, and obviously what they want to do is pin those 2 divisions down so that they don't move south.
Captain, give me your feel as a former pilot. We see that there's a Battle of Baghdad coming in one fashion or another. How involved is a pilot with the planning of that, and what are his thoughts at this point?
Well, to mirror what the colonel said, you have a daily air tasking order that comes out. And we used to get our air tasking order around 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. We had 7 mission planning cells, 1 for every day of the week. That mission planning cell would come in, take the air tasking order with all the targets on it, and then plan the next day's missions. There's some big differences between when we flew and the war of today. For example, when we flew in the middle of the night, the Republican Guard divisions were in southern Iraq and northern Kuwait, basically wide open. We can go in on any night, roll in on them, and attack them. They were not fighting our ground forces. I think they've learned from that. Now they're hunkered back, they're near Baghdad, they're not leaving themselves wide open. They also realize that our ground forces are there. That creates problems for the pilots because you have friendly fire issues that you have to be careful about. You mentioned the weather earlier, that's also a problem.
Colonel, I want to get a feel for you. We've seen the power of our Air Force. I guess I'll talk to this camera, even though he's sitting next to me. We have the power of our Air Force that we've seen, especially during Gulf War I, and it softened them up, so a lot of people think that had a lot to do with it only being a 100-hour ground war. If you give away those advantages, the technological advantages, and end up going block by block in Baghdad, give me a feel for the technology we have available now that we didn't have, say, 12 years ago, to allow us to have a victory, even if we have to do that.
If it's a ground fight and you're doing what is called combat in the cities, or MOUT, which is mounted operations in urban terrain, a lot of it depends on the city itself. And in this case, frankly, the city of Baghdad, because it's a very lowly built city. There are very few buildings in Baghdad that are over 3 stories. So, and secondly, they have a lot of wide boulevards. So it's not like Mogadishu, where you had guys fighting in very compressed areas, very condensed areas. Notwithstanding that, what the urban terrain does is it negates some of the advantages, for example, air power. Your ability to use fixed wing air, jets and fighters, much more limited. You're much more dependent on helicopters, and of course the helicopters are a little bit more vulnerable. That said, we bring the same kind of technological advantages to bear in an urban environment that we have in an open environment. What you lose is the ability to get the long shot, which is critical the way that CENTCOM is fighting this war. Inevitably, what you're seeing here in an open field environment, we outrange the enemy's guns. Our artillery has a much faster decision cycle in terms of the ability to fight what is called the counter-fire fight. Where their systems are Soviet systems, it takes them 2 minutes to detect a round that comes from our artillery and then shoot back at it. We can fire back within about 30 seconds. So those kinds of things get negated when you're in an urban environment because you have to be much more concerned. You don't get the long shots because of buildings.
What about night vision?
Night vision is a huge advantage for us, and that, because of the thermal imaging, it's a huge advantage that also applies in an urban environment because it picks up heat sources.
Captain, I've got another question for you, just switching gears a little bit. Iraqi TV was bombed last night. Now, it's apparently back on the air. But today, groups like Amnesty International are saying that that might have been a violation of the Geneva Accords because it's a civilian object and therefore protected under the Accords. But to me, it sure seems like a state-owned propaganda tool, so thus it would be a legitimate target. What say you?
It may be a legitimate target. I know from a pilot's perspective, I never question those things.
Yeah.
When I was in the planning stages of a mission, if I got a target list, I planned those targets. I didn't question. My job was not to call back and say, hey, is this legitimate or not?
Good point. So, in other words, if you're told, okay, you need to hit Iraqi TV, you hit it.
That's correct.
Okay. I guess
they're not even going to tell me it's Iraqi TV. They're going to give me a set of coordinates and a building or a structure. They're going to tell me what the defenses are around it, and then I can plan that mission accordingly.
All right. Former Air Force Captain Keith Rosenkrantz, 8 years in the Air Force as an F-16 pilot, Gulf War vet, author of Vipers in the Storm. It was really great of you to come on at such a late hour, and your perspective is much appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Let's bring in Colonel Oliver North, who's traveling now with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force on its way to Baghdad somewhere in Iraq. Colonel, what can you tell us? What's going on?
Bob, we've had 48 hours of some of the worst weather on the planet Earth, and it has kept these aircraft that you can hear turning behind me, kept them from flying and even conducting casualty evacuations. However, the weather now has cleared. It is early morning. The Cobras that you hear turning behind us are here at this forward arming and refueling point on the road to Baghdad, rearming their aircraft and going back into the fight. What we also see just behind me is the area where just a few moments ago 5 Iraqis surrendered. During the latter hours of last night, there was a firefight just forward of the aircraft behind me, which required even the air crew of this aircraft to stand at the ready with their M16s and the .50 caliber aboard the aircraft. Just forward of this aircraft is a CH-46, which is damaged. It's now being repaired. It was not damaged by enemy fire. It simply sucked up so much dust, the engine had to be shut down. The bird made an emergency landing. It is now being repaired. From the road to north of Al-Nasiriyah on the road to Baghdad, Oliver North.
Colonel, give me a feel. We asked this of Rick Leventhal a little while ago. Has this stop due to the weather also allowed you to catch up on some of your sleep, and are the troops able to get some rest also?
Bob, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you over the sound of the aircraft, but the weather has slowed things down, but it was as bad for the enemy as it was for us. The fact is we've still got equipment like FLIR, forward-looking infrared radars and the like, and lots of very sophisticated equipment around us that allowed us to be able to defend this forward area and still be able to hit the enemy when the enemy couldn't really see us because they don't have the kind of equipment. The Iraqis who surrendered just a few minutes ago off to my right-hand side, right over here, were literally without food or water for the last 48 hours, so they've not been resupplied either. And what we're looking at is, given the clearing weather, a much more rapid advancement toward Baghdad. There is literally nothing in our way between here and Baghdad except the possibility as we get closer of those enemy units that we've looked for so long, those Republican Guards.
All right, Colonel Oliver North, traveling with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. Thank you, sir.
And now let's go to the Iraqi-Jordanian border a few hundred miles away, specifically to Rawashid, Jordan, and that is where our own Steve Harrigan is standing by. And Steve, if you would, please bring us up to date on the latest.
Lori, some more details on that strike that happened midday in Baghdad yesterday, a strike that Iraqi officials say left 17 dead, 45 wounded. That strike coming in a crowded marketplace. Now, there is still no clear version of exactly who is responsible for the 2 loud explosions that shook that area. Iraqi officials placing the blame squarely on the U.S. They say the U.S. sent 2 cruise missiles into that civilian area. U.S. officials say that is not the case. They say that Iraqis were using surface-to-surface missiles that were being targeted. They were placing them just yards from civilian homes and residents there. The U.S. officials also hinting at other possibilities that this could have been an errant Iraqi missile, or else Iraqis could have placed a bomb there to draw blame on the U.S. In any case, fire and rescue went to the scene. It was a chaotic scene, and in this part of the world, that scene is playing one way and one way only. It is being blamed on the Americans, whether intentional or not. It is being portrayed today on a front-page picture of the Jordan Times. There's a picture of little children in Iraq, in Baghdad, walking over that rubble. So it is being portrayed as a U.S. strike, intentional or not, against civilians. In the meantime, British Prime Minister Tony Blair is expressing his outrage over some things shown on the television. Some footage apparently of 2 British soldiers killed in action near the city of Basra. Now, the footage lasts about 30 seconds long. It was first shown on Iraqi TV, then picked up by Arab satellite television networks. It shows 2 British soldiers spread-eagled on a dirt road, and their bodies are being shifted by foot. So this has also unleashed a storm of outrage in the British press. This is the 4th time since the fighting began that coalition forces, either killed in action or prisoners of war, have been shown by Iraqi television in a violation, coalition forces say, of the Geneva Convention. Lori, back to you.
Yeah, clearly the Arab media telling a very different story than what we're seeing here. Steve Harrigan in Rawashid, Jordan, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
And bring it back now, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Haig, retired U.S. Army. Colonel, there are a lot of decisions being made now at CENTCOM. You helped set that up. Has this been, you know, a lot of people are playing this, that this has been a real surprise, the resistance that we've seen in the early days from the Iraqis. Give me your feel about that.
Yeah, I think, first of all, a lot of people have made a lot of mistakes about making predictions about the war. Now, you haven't heard those predictions coming out of the Central Command. You didn't hear from the Central Command, shock and awe, we're going to knock them flat in 3 days or whatever. The Central Command has never said those things. And you're now hearing a lot of second guessing that's occurring. And that's wrong, too, because those guys in that operations center have about 500,000 times more information than anybody in a Fox News studio, myself.
Wouldn't it be realistic, though, to say there has been a surprise as far as the tactics that have been used and the fervency which they've seen from these people? I mean, they're dressing up. These are violations, mind you, but dressing up in civilian clothing, luring in some of our troops acting like they're surrendering and then attacking. Yeah. This is a kind of guerrilla warfare, maybe desert guerrilla warfare. Yeah. Hasn't that surprised them? Because there were some politicians that were saying we're going to be received as liberators, and that's the goal here, of course, the ultimate goal, but it hasn't worked that way.